Years ago, Elie Wiesel of blessed memory, the famous author, Nobel laureate, spokesperson of conscience, was asked by the Dalai Lama of all people if they can get together. The Dalai Lama wanted to meet Elie Wiesel. And they had their conversation, and after, Elie Wiesel asked him, with all due respect, why was it important for you to see me? I'm just curious as to why this was important for you. And the Dalai Lama said, your people have suffered a lot, and you went into exile 2,000 years ago. But amazingly, somehow, the Jewish identity is still there. So even though you were exiled 2,000 years ago, you still identify as Jews. All over the world, Jews identify as Jews. My people just started our exile. And I want to know the secret of survival. How you survive as an identity outside of your homeland. So the Jewish people somehow made it without living in Israel for a long period of time, and you kept your Jewish identity. It's important for people like us, referring to him and his people, that are now outside of their homeland to know how it is that we can survive ourselves out of our homeland. The truth is, the secret to our survival didn't start 2,000 years ago. It started well before that. It started with a man named Abraham, and it started with a mountain, with Abraham meeting God on top of a mountain. And we have been meeting God on top of our mountains ever since. Think about it. Think about what are the odds. The odds that after all these centuries, after these millennia of exile and persecution, that there would still be an identifiable Jewish people in the calendar year of 2025. Now, it's easy for us to say yes, but if you were to go back 1,000 years and try to predict that there would still be an identifiable Jewish people in the year 2025, when you were being persecuted by superpowers everywhere in the world, it is miraculous. And that goes back to that idea that we mentioned last week, this wrestling match of Jacob, in which he doesn't surrender, he doesn't give in. So even as we wrestle, even when we're hurt, even when we're wounded, we somehow prevail. We still come out the other end. Yisrael, that's who we are. That's the very name Israel. We never stopped climbing our mountain, collectively as a people and individually as an individual Jew. Nor will we ever. We continue to persevere. We continue to go on. In his memoir of the Eichmann trial, one of the prosecutors, the Israeli prosecutors, his name was Gideon Hausner. So he wrote about the experience of the Adolf Eichmann trial, where Israel literally came to a halt to watch every minute of this trial. In his book, Hausner writes that showing the depth of the evil of how far they went, that Eichmann took, they ransacked all the synagogues and they took all the possessions of the synagogues. We've spoke about it where there was a museum literally that they were going to build to show what once upon a time there used to be a Jewish people, and these were their sacred objects. So they would take objects from the synagogue to really cause more pain to the Jew. If you're familiar, in every synagogue there is an ark. Inside the ark are the holy scrolls, the Torah scrolls. In many of the synagogues, that ark has this beautiful curtain in front of it. You've seen these curtains? Some of them have solid color, some of them very colorful, some of them artsy, some have images on it. It's called a paroches. Paroches means a curtain, and it's the curtain. If I said the word paroches, generally it's referring to the curtain inside a synagogue that hangs in front of the ark. Well, Eichmann took this velvet curtain from a synagogue. And what did he do with it? He hung it on the entrance of a gas chamber in Auschwitz. And that was to mock the Jews of, you're walking through the curtain, This is your holy curtain, and yes, where is it leading you? It's leading you to death. So you can imagine the pain, the humiliation. You know you're walking to your death, walking into a gas chamber, and what does he do? He puts the paroches there. You have to walk by this curtain that once hung in your synagogue in order to get in. And shows you the sadistic monster that he was, to taunt the Jew on their way to their death. It wasn't enough that they were going to die, but he needed to add the extra taunt. So Hausner writes, and he writes it brilliantly, isn't it interesting that yes, he used that to taunt us, but that we could point today and say, and look how many new curtains we have put up since. You thought you were wiping us off the face of the map. You thought there would never be a synagogue again with these curtains. You thought you were taunting us. We took it as a challenge to survive. And since the Holocaust, how many thousands upon thousands upon thousands of these paroches have been made and put up in synagogues in every single corner of the world. And so we could point still to that paroches and say, yes, you took 6 million of us, but we survived. We're still here. So Eichmann and his like, they took many of our relatives. They took my father's entire family. They took my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts. They took so many of your parents and grandparents. They took our Zaydis and our Bubbies, our aunts, our uncles, our brothers and our sisters, and they made them walk past this paroches on their way to the gas chamber. So they may have wounded us like Jacob's thigh was wounded, but they didn't defeat us, just like Jacob wasn't defeat us. Because we took that paroches back and we put them up again and again and again. We continue to climb our mountains and we don't quit. We wrestle back. We wrestle with man, we wrestle with our enemies, we wrestle with angels, and we even wrestle with God. But we carry on, we go on. For every bout of adversity that we have faced, we have rebounded stronger than ever before. From every period of time of history of destruction, we've rebuilt bigger and better than before. It would have been easy to quit, to give up, to throw in the towel, but we don't do so. Because our forefathers taught us how to climb a mountain. And that's why so many of the biblical stories have this metaphor, this part of the story that's about climbing a mountain. I want to share with you a story about someone named Motl Zatinsky. Motl Zatinsky lost his wife and 5 children during World War II. And then he had to go from concentration camp to concentration camp to concentration camp. After the war was over, he was in no physical condition to go on. He felt his strength waning, and he was sent to a DP camp. And in the DP camps, they tried to bring our people back slowly to health, to having a proper diet, to trying to have them have a life, a future life. So although physically he started coming back to himself, emotionally he was drained. It's very hard to pick up the pieces from losing your wife and 5 children and to say, okay, celebrate survival. We see this today with some of the hostages that are coming home and finding out that their loved ones, that their wives, that their children didn't survive October 7th. And so yes, at first there's the celebration of survival, but at the same time, they have to then pick up the pieces and try to cope with life post the tragedy of October 7th. So there is this Motl Zatinsky, and people are trying to encourage him to pick up the pieces and go on. And someone proposed to him a shidduch. You know what a shidduch is? A match. You know, there is a woman here as well And why don't you get together, meet her, and see maybe there's something here. Remarry again and start life over again. There were many chuppahs, many weddings that took place in the DP camps. Many people that got married there in the DP camps. And someone is trying to encourage Zatinsky. She's here, she's interested in going out with you. I don't know what type of date they would possibly have in a DP camp. Not exactly a Starbucks coffee that you can go to or a lounge to go to. And so reluctantly he went because, again, emotionally he didn't feel ready for this. But she was a nice woman. And they met again, and they met again and again until they decided they should get engaged and they should get married. The day of the wedding arrives. Sure enough, the bride showed up. Whichever friends they had showed up. The rabbi showed up. He wrote the ksuba from memory. He wrote it. Everyone is there, but Matal is not there. Matal is a no-show. The friends right away start looking all over. Where can he be? They go to his room. He's not there. His apartment. He's not there. They go to the synagogue. He's not there. But then someone remembers that there's a room right off the synagogue. And the synagogue was a makeshift room that they put up in these DP camps. But there was a room right off it that was used kind of as the library room, where they had some books. And he opens that door, and there he finds Matal is there. He's sitting at the table. His head is down, and he's crying. So the friend says, Matal, the chuppah is now. The chuppah is now. No movement, no response. Matal, the guests are all waiting at the chuppah area. No response. The rabbi is waiting. He's waiting for you. No response. And finally, to add some urgency, Matal, your kala, your bride, she's waiting. You can't keep everybody waiting like this. And finally, Matal lifts his head. His eyes were red. There were tears all over his face. And with this voice shaking in indescribable pain, he yells out in Yiddish, Was chuppah? Wen chuppah? Wie chuppah? What chuppah? When chuppah? Where chuppah? How chuppah? He had rethought the idea of him getting married again. And he's yelling to his friend, chuppah, how can you talk to me about a chuppah? And he starts naming his 5 children. Will they be coming with me to the chuppah? He cries out each of his children's name. Will they be coming with me? If so, how do I go on? How do I go on? The thought of him rebuilding his life, but his children were not going to be part of the life, was too much for him. And so perhaps this was too premature to take someone in his condition and convince him to get married and move on with a new life where he hasn't dealt with the pain yet of the loss of his wife and 5 children. And so he's crying hysterically here, Was chuppah, how can you talk to me about a chuppah? And with that, he put his head back down, continued to cry. His friend is watching this, hearing this, and realizes he has no response to this. What's he going to say? It's okay, it's going to be okay. He has no response. All he can do is put his hand on his friend's back and just stand quietly. And then something unexpected happens. Matal lifted his head, slams his fist down on the table like this, and yells out in Yiddish, Aber megain. That means, but we're going. But we're going. And just like that, he stood up with the determination of a soldier. Armed and ready for battle, he walked with his friend to the chuppah and began the next chapter of his life. Motul Zatinsky would indeed rebuild his life. He's known as Rav Motul Zatinsky. He serves as a headmaster for the yeshiva in Bnei Brak with thousands of students under his guidance. Aber Megain. We don't dismiss, ignore, forget the pain that we've been through, the struggles we've been through, the periods of time of Jewish history that we have been through that have been troubling and difficulty. Aber Megain, but we know we must continue the climb. That's what our parents put into us, our grandparents put this into us. Aber Megain, we go forward. For everything that we have been through, especially in this period of time post-October 7th, Megain. It doesn't stop us from going forward. We go forward with the pain. We marked the first Yortzeit of October 7th on Simchas Torah this year by dancing with the Torahs, not because we forgot how painful last October 7th was, but because Megain, we have to move forward. And so we danced with the tears. We danced in our minds holding on to the hostages and their families. We danced in our minds holding on to the soldiers because we must move forward. When I think of this particular story of Motul Zatinsky, it reminds me of another story of another Motul. But this Motul is closer to home. My father was Motul Brisky. And my father lost, as I mentioned, his entire family. He was the lone survivor from his entire family. He lost his 4 sisters, his brother, his father, his mother, uncles and aunts. Well, my father made it out alive. And if you know his story, he was able to survive by running from city to city. He made his way to Lithuania. And there in Lithuania, he was able to get one of the Sugihara visas, which got him into Japan. And then when Japan got into the war, he made his way to Shanghai, China. So a long journey of how he made it to this country. But when he finally made it to this country, all he wanted to do was spend some time now sitting calmly in the yeshiva and studying. Because the last years of his life was running for his life. So all he wanted was some peace and quiet, some tranquility. And someone approached him and suggested a match, a shidduch, with a girl named Ethel Eckhouse. My father asked him to leave him alone. I just came. Please, the last few years have not been that easy. And also, he hasn't yet dealt with the pain of the loss of his entire family. You're coming to me about getting married. So he wanted to be, let's not talk about this. But somehow the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, heard about this and called my father into his office and said that you don't pass up opportunities like this. And so what did my father do? A similar attitude like Motul Zatinsky. Megain, you must move forward. Yes, despite the emotional turmoil, you move forward. And he said, okay. And he met Ethel Eckhouse. And together they built a Jewish dynasty of children, of grandchildren, of great-grandchildren. Megain, we go further. We go onwards. And that's the way we've always done it. We each have mountains to climb. We each have obstacles to overcome. And we each have the baggage of pain of our past history. But we never allow that to stop us from going forward as a Jewish people. We continue to take it on. I'll tell you one more story on this theme of climbing the mountain, and then we'll get back to the discussion here of kosher and how kosher might be that mountain for us to climb. But relatively speaking to the mountains our parents climbed, it's not that difficult, especially when you have pizza nash on the block. This may sound like a story out of the dark ages, but it actually happened in 2007, not that long ago. And it takes place in Azerbaijan, Baku, Azerbaijan. There was a Jewish woman there who was married to a non-Jew, who was loosely affiliated with the Russian Orthodox Church. So she married someone not really religious, but connected to the church. He wasn't practicing, he wasn't an active member of the church. So when the woman told him that Chabad just opened up a school in Azerbaijan, yes, we do have a school there too. Luckily, when they picked the names out of the hats, Agura or Azerbaijan, I got Agura. I could have gotten the other A. I could have been in Azerbaijan right now. I got Agura, lucky for me. But someone else is in Azerbaijan, and he opened a Jewish school. Now, they had a 9-year-old daughter. So the Jewish wife says to her husband, would it be okay with you if I send our 9-year-old daughter to this new Chabad school? And he said, fine, go ahead, fine with me. And she starts attending the school. And she loved it. She was taking it all in. And everything that was introduced, she wanted to bring home. So if they talked about Shabbat and lighting the candles, she wanted to light the candle at home. Her mother loved the idea, so her mother lit the candle with her. And then they spoke about the making of the Kiddush, and she wanted to do it at home. Everything she studied, she wanted it at home. Now at first, her father thought all of this was cute. It was all cute. It was like, remember last week we spoke about hanging up the pictures of our kids in kindergarten on the refrigerator. It's cute. He took it all as cute, but as time went on, it wasn't getting cute anymore. It was like, one second here, I'm not Jewish, I'm not part of this, and now you're starting to make me keep all these things in the house. He started getting uncomfortable. And finally he said to his wife, I'll make a deal with you. The deal is, I have gone along with all of this. I have let you sign her up in this school. I didn't tell you, hey, but it's not for me. I let you, I'm okay with it going along. However, I just think it's right if at the same time she be baptized by my religion as well. It's got to be fair. You do yours, and I do mine. I'm not saying that she has to go to my church's school, but she has to be baptized in my church. And if she's baptized in my church, she can continue going to your school. We both be happy. But no longer this one-way street. Now at first, the mother wasn't too pleased with this, but then she said, it's not a bad deal. It's not a bad deal. She gets to continue going to the school. All right, fine, you got yourself a deal. And sure enough, he makes an appointment for the following Friday afternoon with the priest of the church in this small Russian town. And during the meeting, the priest asks the girl if she indeed wants to become a Christian, and she says, no, I'm Jewish. And her father gives her a look like, you cut it out. You go along with this deal I made with your mom, or there's no more school. And she says, oh, okay, yes. And as the ceremony, whatever the ceremony was going along, at some point the priest asks her to light a candle. And she goes to the table. She looks at the clock. She smiles, and she says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kedishana b'mitzvosav v'tzivana lahadlik ner shel Shabbat Kodesh. And she lights a Shabbos candle right there in this Russian church. In her mind, she was still practicing Judaism. She was lighting a Shabbos candle. It was Friday afternoon. This 9-year-old child climbed her mountain at that particular time. Through no fault of her own, her father part of a church, her mother Jewish, she's too young to get involved in understanding what's going on. But it's Friday afternoon, and the priest says light a candle, so I'm going to light my Shabbos candle right here. I try to imagine God at that particular moment and the nachas that God has, seeing a 9-year-old child inside a church saying a blessing, Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you, O God, who has given us the sanctity of lighting the Shabbat candle. It is not just in Azerbaijan, but when he looks down here in the United States of America in the year 2025, And Jewish women who weren't raised with it are starting to light Shabbat candles. Maybe it skipped a generation, maybe it skipped 2 generations, maybe even 3 generations, but they're starting now. From the God perspective, the nachas he has of seeing thousands of years after he introduced Shabbat, and we're still doing it. And so all of these stories are really combined. Abraham climbing a mountain to bring his son Isaac. We look at this story as one of the greatest challenges of faith. Yes, but at the same time, God is giving you your challenge. It may be very different. It may be not as big as that, but it's your mountain. You remember last week I told you the story of Solomon Mizrahi, the businessman in Mexico. He climbed his mountain. This girl in Azerbaijan, she climbed her mountain. Remember I told you last week about the boy who turned down money from his grandfather if he would drop out of school. That was his mountain. We each have a mountain to climb. So we often speak about the importance of community, of congregation, of coming together, of worshiping as a group. And indeed, it's of paramount importance in Jewish life that we do things together collectively. But I think that every once in a while, it's also a good idea for there to be some solitude. Spend some time alone. When I'm saying alone, it's not just with people, but alone means put the phone away, close the computer, shut the television, and just pretend there's no one else in the world at that moment. Just you and God. It's an exercise to do every once in a while. There's no one to impress. There's no one to imitate. There's no one to appease. There's nothing that's politically correct or politically incorrect. It's just you and God. Purity. Nothing else on the side. And think deeply about your inner truths, your beliefs, and your fears. Think about your particular and personal challenges, your mountains that you have in your life, the mountain that's difficult for you to climb. And ask God for the strength to climb that mountain. Because the strength is there, it's in you. You just have to believe it's in you. And you have to feel it. You need to make that move and start to climb. Now maybe you won't reach the peak right away. Stories don't happen right away in one chapter that you tried something and it worked perfectly and everything went great. You'll start your climb. You'll slip a little bit. You'll try again the next day. You'll slip a little bit more. But eventually you'll continue that climb. It might look invincible to start. And maybe you're afraid of heights. But trust me on this. You're no different than everyone else in this room that have climbed mountains. Because we all were afraid. We all thought we were going to slip. And we all have this fear of heights. But we continue to climb. It's easy to climb someone else's mountain. When you look at someone else's life, you think that's easy. The challenge is to climb your mountain, the challenge that's in front of you. So we have been talking about kosher this entire semester. Let's try to do something in the world of kosher. Each in their own way, and I've been saying this week after week. Whether it's the purchase of kosher products, whether it's going to kosher dining areas, whether it's learning what it would take to kosher your home, whatever it may be, step by step by step, climbing that mountain. I do have a few minutes. I do want to read actual text with you. We won't have the time this week to get into the details of the text. We're going to read the text. Do you know what you're supposed to do? You're going to put the text on for the Zoom people? Wow, that's great. And then once we'll go through it, next week we're going to start dissecting the text. What does all of this mean? This comes from the book of Deuteronomy. It's chapter 14. It's verse number 3. I'll read it in English for you. You shall not eat any abomination, these are the animals that you may eat: an ox, a lamb, and a kid, a gazelle, a deer, an antelope, ibex, chamois, bison, and giraffe. That's right, a giraffe is a kosher animal. No one's ever tasted it, and you know the reason. I've explained the reason why. We don't know where on that neck the kosher slaughter takes place, and so we don't do it, but a giraffe is a kosher animal. Verse number 6, and we're going to come back to verse 6 a great deal, so just remember what it says. So right now it listed some sample animals, right, that you can have. Then it says, and every animal, so now we're going to open it up, not just what I said in verse 4 and 5, but every animal, if it has the following two conditions. One, that has a split hoof, and has a hoof cloven into two hoof sections. So on its leg, you're able to see that its leg is divided into two. And choose the cud among the animals that you may eat. There are some animals that after it swallows its food, and the food goes through its stomach, it's able to bring it back up again and chew it again and eat it again. If an animal has both of those signs, it's a kosher animal, even if it wasn't listed in verse 4 and verse 5. You follow so far?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. Now, when we have time next week, we're going to ask the question that I don't know if you even remember you asked me 3 weeks ago.
I remember.
Why these two signs? It could be, it just happens to be the two signs that identify every kosher animal, or is there a message there in these two signs as well? Is there something there? Can we find a common denominator of any sort between every kosher animal? Is there something there? Remember that kosher is part of the laws that are no reasons given. So nowhere does the Torah say, I'm letting you eat the lamb because Mary had a little lamb and Mary was a good woman. It doesn't say that anywhere. It just says this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. But it's left for us over hundreds and thousands of years of observations, if we would like to pursue it, to try to look into it. Can we find a common denominator? Can we find something about chewing its cud and split hooves? Any message there for us that will help us understand this a little better? But for today, we're just reading text. Text number 7. But you shall not eat of those that choose its cud, or of those that have the split hooves. I just gave you rules in verse number 6, and the rules were that it needed to have two signs, chew its cud and have split hooves. But in those categories, I want you to know that you have to be careful, because there are animals that only have one of the two signs. And so you're going to see an animal with split hooves and you're going to think you can eat it, because it doesn't chew its cud. You're going to see an animal that chews its cud but doesn't have split hooves. You can't eat it. It's not 50% kosher. If it only has one sign, it doesn't make it 50%. It's still not kosher. And we have verse number 7 that spells that out for us. You shall not eat of those that chew its cud, or of those that have the split hooves, the cloven one, the camel, the hyrax, the hare, for they chew the cud, but they do not have split hooves. They are unclean for you. Verse 8, and the pig gets special mention. The pig has split hooves, but it doesn't chew its cud.
Like us.
It's unclean for you. You shall neither eat of their flesh nor touch their carcass. Wow. I will come back to this question. Right now I'll just throw it out as a question. Why do I need verse 7 and 8 altogether? If you already established in verse number 6 that it must have two signs, then any of those animals listed in 7 and 8 have been disqualified by verse 6 already. What does 7 and 8 come to teach me? Just keep that question in mind. We'll come back to it. I'll explain the question over again when I get to it. These you may eat of all that is in water. So we've covered now animal. Now we're moving to the fish, the seas. So of that which is in the water, again, 2 signs, all that have fins and scales you may eat. It needs 2 signs, one that it has fins and one that it has scales. And again, the question, can we learn anything from these 2 signs? But whatever does not have fins, verse number 10, and does not have scales, you shall not eat. It is unclean for you. Number 11, you may eat every clean bird. Well, what's a clean bird? Verse 12. But these are those which you shall not eat: the eagle, or the griffin vulture, the ossifrage, the osprey, the white vulture, the black vulture, and the kite after its species, and every raven after its species, and the ostrich, and the owl, and the gull, and the hawk after its species, the falcon, and the ibis, and the bat, and the pelican, and the magpie, and the cormorant, and the stork, and the heron, and its species, and the hoopoe, and the atalef. The atalef is, I pronounce it the way it's written in Hebrew, because there's a whole debate. What is an atalef? Some people say it's in the bat family. It's subject to opinion. So when it came to the birds, notice it didn't give them the identifiable signs. Doesn't have to have split hooves, doesn't have to have chew its cud, or like the fish, fins and scales. It says, you'll know, we're going to teach you what the clean birds are, but all of these birds are absolutely no's. And then Moses would teach us which are left. What are we allowed to eat? Well, I think you know which fowl's most eaten. The chicken, the turkey, those are the permissible, the doves, the pigeons. Again, is there a common denominator? Can we find something within the kosher animals? And do we see something within the non-kosher animals that we just listed, something about all those animals? And again, the Torah will not give me a reason and say, and therefore you can't eat it, therefore you can eat it. But are we able to find any of these common denominators? Finally, we get to insects. And every flying insect is unclean for you. They may not be eaten. Sorry about that, folks. No flying insects for you. You may eat any clean fowl. You shall not eat any carcass. It means that, as I taught you before, it has to be slaughtered properly. If even a kosher animal died on its own, it's no longer kosher if it wasn't slaughtered properly. And again, we're going to get into a lot of details on every one of these verses. Right now I'm just presenting it to you, and then hopefully whetting your appetite to come back next week. You may give it to the stranger who is in your cities. When the Torah says you may give it to the stranger who is in your cities, that he may eat it, or you may sell it to a foreigner, that means that you're allowed to benefit from it. You're allowed to benefit from non-kosher food. You can sell it, you can give it as a gift, but there are times where the Torah will say you can't benefit from something. Milk and meat mixed together you can't benefit from. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. And finally, you shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. That's the beginning of the laws of the mixing of milk and meat. And again, every one of these verses needs time to elaborate on it. We're going to get into these verses next week. I'm also going to give you some kosher lexicon, words that you always hear when it comes to kosher. You've heard the word milchiks. You've heard the word fleishiks. You've heard the word parav. You hear the word shochet, mashkiach. I'll just give you a list of all of these words and where these words came from and what they mean in this world of kosher.